Okay, good evening, everyone, and nice to see everyone live and on Zoom. I posted for those online. I posted the link in the chat, and I'll put it under the YouTube recording also for those who want to look at the link for the handout. So to remind ourselves, we're in the middle of Perek Vav, and um, all I will mention from last week is that in Perek Hay we learnt um, about the restart of the building under the instruction of the Nevi'im, and how the local governor, Tatanoi, had challenged the rebuilding project. And he doesn't seem to have been a fierce enemy of the new Jewish colony. He seems merely to have been asking what's going on over here. And ultimately, he writes to headquarters. He's the regional governor. He writes to Darius, and he seems to fairly, in a fair manner, put forward the Jewish claim that they have permission from Koresh, and they bring evidence to that. They say, look, we had the decree of Koresh. We even have the Kalim back that were looted by the Babylonian conquerors. We're not building a defensive wall. This isn't a fortress. This is merely a place of religious worship, and therefore you should allow us to do this. And he seems to transcribe in a faithful manner their argument. And we also looked last week at the seemingly slightly incompetent Daryovish response. He doesn't seem to know about his own laws, and they have to go hunting to find the law. We said this might be the result of political chaos at the time. It may be the result of the capital moving, because when Poros Amodai, when the Persian-Median alliance took over from the Babylonians, eventually, as per Megillas Esther, they moved their capital from the Babylonian headquarters to the Persian cities, and maybe things got lost in that process, or maybe this is a result of anti-Semitism. Maybe the same lobbyists who tried to stop under Koresh the rebuilding project also somehow managed to get rid of this decree. We even put forward a candidate, the Malbim. Maybe this is Haman, no less, who was involved in that. Either way, they eventually discover in a backwater, maybe in the name of this place, Achmasal. Maybe Achmasal doesn't refer to a place, but then it carries on Birossa to be Modai Medinta, in a palace in the province of Media. So in this backwater, they discover not a proper decree, but a Megillah Chada, a roll. And there they found a record of Koresh's decree for allowing the Jewish people to go back. And I think we left things off by saying that we were going to do a little bit of a comparison between the description in chapter 6 of Koresh's decree and the description in chapter 1 when Koresh actually made his decree. Why are there discrepancies between the two versions? Either because chapter 1 records the actual decree, maybe the way it was formally framed, whereas chapter 6 records the record that Daryavish found. We said he may not even found a formal court record. This may have been the personal archives of the king, in which he finds his records. So possibly what's going on is this is a different version of the decree, or maybe the Nach or the kings are summarizing different aspects of the decree for whatever reason it wants to bring out different points. But all we'll do is a very brief compare and contrast between the two versions. And we're only going to look at the English for now because we're still in Aramaic text and it's hard enough translating Hebrew. We're not going to get caught up in trying to translate Aramaic. We mentioned Aramaic as the diplomatic language of the time, the courtly language of the time, and therefore that's the language that's being used in for now. We're going to only go back to Hebrew, by the way, right at the end of our chapter, so we've still got quite a chunk of diplomatic stuff going on. Excuse me, written in Aramaic. And just a quick comparison therefore in the English. And again, I put the handout in the link for those who want it, who want to click on it. So we'll look at Ezra chapter 6. Daryovesh, a search is made. He has to decree a search. Pasuk 1, eventually Pasuk 2, they find a roll. Pasuk 3, in the first year of Koresh the king, Koresh the king made a decree concerning the house of Hashem in Yerushalayim. Let the house be built, the place where they offer sacrifices. Let the foundations be laid there. It gives dimensions. It should be made with rolling stones or valuable stones. We discussed this. And there should be rows of timber, rows of wood. It shouldn't be all stone. And we also discussed that last time. And let the gold and silver vessels that were looted by Nebuchadnezzar now be put back in the Beis Hamikdash. Let them return in the Beis Hamikdash. So that's the current version, the version that Daryovish is aware of. In the original version, Koresh makes a proclamation. There's something grandiose about the proclamation. He says, "I am the ruler of the all the kingdoms of the earth, and Hashem has charged me to build a house in Yerushalayim in Judah." Okay, so we understand why when Daryovesh finds the decree, he's not interested in Koresh's aggrandizement, Koresh's boastful claims that he's a powerful empire, particularly if Daryovesh isn't quite a clean successor of Koresh. We mentioned Achashverosh may have been somewhat of a usurper or belonging to a junior branch of the family. Maybe he's a son-in-law, not a son. We discussed that secular historical records seem to indicate that maybe Daryovesh belonged to a slightly different line. Maybe there's a bit of chaos when he takes over. So maybe he's not interested in repeating Koresh's claim that I am the mighty empire. Maybe he's also not interested in repeating Koresh's claim that I am, I'm doing this as commanded by God. So Koresh claims for himself or sees himself as a messenger of Hashem in giving this decree. We don't know if this is true or disingenuous, because don't forget, this seems to have been a general policy of Koresh to allow lots of native people to go back and have some form of autonomy. It seems to have been a political philosophy of Koresh to let lots of people return to their native land. Now, in the original decree, it says that they should be helped with gold and silver, Pasuk 4. It doesn't say that the kingdom of the Beis Hamikdash should be returned, though evidently that was part of the Jewish claim. And all he says is you should go back to Judah and build a house of Hashem. He doesn't say anything about the dimensions of the house. He doesn't say anything about it should be built with wood and stone, not just with stone. And he doesn't mention that this should be a place of sacrifice. So let's ask ourselves, why would Daryovesh? Well, we don't know why there's a difference between the two versions. Is it a different record of the law because this is a personal note and the political note, or is Daryovesh adding his own spin to Koresh's decree? So let's ask ourselves. There's a few features that are additional here. He mentions that this is a place to offer sacrifices. He gives the dimensions of this building. He says there should be timber in the building, and that the gold and silver vessels of Hashem, of the house of Hashem should be returned, which the Jews anyway have. They somehow anyway got hold of the gold and silver vessels. Koresh doesn't say that. He doesn't say this should be a place of sacrifice. He just says build a house of God there. And he doesn't mention anything about dimensions, and he doesn't mention anything about building it out of adding a wood layer to it. So what agenda might Koresh have or Daryovesh have at work here, if he is misquoting Koresh and subtly altering the decree?
Isn't that how the laws were written at that time? In that you couldn't repeal something that had been.
So that's excellent. You can't repeal an existing law. Nonetheless, you can put a different spin on it. That's really the whole Megillah story. They can't get rid of the decree that people have the right to fight the Jews, but they can say that the Jews have the right to fight back and give them support for it. Okay, so Daryovesh has found Koresh's law, but the version that he says we found seems to differ very slightly or either the version he found or the version he claims to have found isn't identical to Koresh's law. So the suggestion I want to put forward, and we will see later that this suggestion comes from, it's hinted at in the Gemara, is that Daryovesh wants to make sure that this new temple built isn't too powerful. He's agreeing with Koresh saying you can go back, but he wants to make it very clear this isn't in any way a political project. This isn't going to be a fortress. This is going to be a place of worship. It's not going to be a national rallying point for the Jews. I want it to be very clear what this building is for. So he may not be as secure or as generous in this respect as Koresh in allowing the return. Well, let's see what he's adding in. He says this is a place of God for sacrifices. So he wants it to be clear this is a place of ritual worship. He gives dimensions. Why would a king get involved in the dimensions of the building project? What does he care? Go and build your temple however you want to build your temple. Why does he have to say build sacrifices there? Go and worship God however you want to worship God. So maybe he's being generous. He's saying, I give you permission to build sacrifices there. But maybe it's restrictive. This is a place of sacrifices. And maybe it doesn't want it too big. Now, does anyone remember the final point of what's the role of timber in a stone building?
Oh, you say it's not a fortress.
It's a weakness. Why is it a weakness? Because it can be burned. So maybe, again, he wants it to be vulnerable. And we saw that last week when they say we're rebuilding the project, the Jews say to him, and we're only building up, don't think this is a political rebellion, we're putting wood into the structure. Now, Daryovish, I'm sorry, may have seized upon that fact, and he doesn't want them to do more than that. So when he's repeating the rule from Kurosh, he's saying, and Kurosh himself specified that it should only be made out of wood. So we don't know if he is somewhat restricting Kirsch's decree, and he wants to make sure that this can't be a fortress, it has to be vulnerable, it has to include built wood in the structure, and not just wood anywhere, by the way, every three rows. So it's not, just one layer of wood or something like that. It's much easier to dismantle. And maybe, again, we need to ask ourselves the question, why is Kurosh mentioning the limitations of this? According to Daryovish's version. So either even Kurosh mentioned the limitations, and for some reason we are only told about this now, or this is Daryovish wanting to make sure that they're not able to do too much in. I don't want this to start becoming overly a national center. This isn't about nationalism. This is about religion. You can serve God, and don't get too many ideas about this. And I also want this to be vulnerable. However, there are things which Daryovish is more generous about also. For example, in Posuk 4, he says that the expenses of this should be out of the king's house, which we don't see that Koresh is doing. We don't find that Koresh offers to pay for it. All Koresh said in his original presentation was that the Jews should contribute. Posuk 4 in Ezra 1 says, whoever is left in any place where they live, in other Jews who don't choose to make Aliyah and move back to Israel, they should help with silver and with gold and with goods, etc. So there seems again to be a discrepancy in which Daryovish seems to be being a little bit more generous than Koresh in his decrees. And we'll see that also as a bit of a pattern. What are we saying so far? That Daryovish is a complicated character. Is he a second generation Koresh? In other words, just a repeat. Koresh allowed the rebuilding to take place, and now Daryovish is coming along and repeating it? Or is he a more complex character who maybe isn't as well-meaning as Koresh, or not? Maybe he is, and on the contrary, he's being more generous, and we will get back to that as a discussion in the Gemara also. Okay, so let's move on. And just yeah, let's move on and look at so far all we have said is the message is what Daryovish claims to have found in the archives. Next stage of the story is that Daryovish now writes back to Tatanai, the governor, and he says to Tatanai, the Jews are correct. I indeed gave permission. The archives show that Koresh gave permission for the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And the continuation of the chapter is that Tatanai indeed allows them to rebuild, and they rebuild, and it's very joyous. And the conclusion of the chapter is that they begin offering korbanos and they dedicate the Beis HaMikdash and they have a carbon Pesach and the like. So that's what we're going to learn today. So just to summarize the story, the Jews started rebuilding under the inspiration of the prophets. Last chapter, chapter Hey, Tatanai challenges it. Chapter Vav, he writes to Koresh. Chapter Vav, Koresh digs through the Daryovish, digs through the archives and finds Koresh's decree. There are subtle differences between the way he finds the decree and the actual version of what Koresh wrote, either because it's a slightly different version of the decree or because Daryovish is giving a bit of a spin on it. And finally, the continuation is Daryovish writes back to Tatanai, the regional governor, let the Jews carry on with the project, and indeed they carry on with the project and they build the Beis HaMikdash and they celebrate. So that's the conclusion of chapter 6. So we're now going to move forward and we're going to look at what did Daryovish write to Tatanai in terms of his guidance. So we're now learning in the source sheet Psukim 6 all the way through to Pasuk 12. And all of this, again, still in Aramaic, still in the diplomatic language, is Daryovish writing to Tatanai saying the Jews can proceed with their project. Now, we're simply going to highlight a few features. Posuk 8, Posuk 6, 7, Daryovesh writes to Tatanai, and he says that they can carry on building the house of God. Posuk 8, he says that the king's goods, expenses should be paid and shouldn't be hindered. So he's saying a number of points. He's saying, I want to make sure that you don't delay the building project, and I want you to use my money to do it. So he's being generous. He says, I want the king's money to be used to do this. And he acknowledges that this is more than Koresh's original decree. Because look what he says in Posuk 8. He says, the Aramaic says, umini, and more so, sim ta'aim lemada ta'avzu nimshavi yodayelach. Let's read the English because it's easier. Wherever I make a decree concerning what you shall do, that of the king's goods, the tribute beyond the river, expenses shouldn't be given, should be given. So here Daryovish is saying, I am being the generous one, and I'm saying that I want money from my treasures to be given to support the project. So again, this is a little difficult because earlier he claims that the version he found from Koresh said that the treasury should contribute towards it. So again, is this a hint that actually Daryovish is playing a little bit, and for some reason or other, he wants the king's money to be used for the building project rather than Jewish money to be used for the building project? And is this innovative coming from him?
So it's his project then.
And therefore, does this lead us to the suspicion that even this act of generosity isn't so good because he's ensuring that this is a king-owned, Persian-owned project rather than a Jewish-owned project? Okay, so we have a number of clues, and we're going to see that the Gemara picks up on this, that Daryovesh is not such a nice fellow as Koresh. It's interesting because Koresh is somewhat of a hero in Nach. He's the Moshiach Hashem. He's the anointed one of God. He's the unique leader given this incredible role of allowing the return to Zion. And is Koresh conscious of that or not conscious of it? Is it part of a general pattern, but he's a pawn? But he is like somehow a messenger of Hashem. Interestingly, his project doesn't really succeed. It's the return of the Jews, but it's not yet the building of the Beis Hamikdash. It's Daryovesh who actually allows the building of the Beis Hamikdash, but Daryovesh is not treated in the same way as a hero. And we'll see later the Gemara plays with the idea that Daryovesh is not such a great character. The last reading maybe is a bit uncharitable. I mean, he's offering to pay for it. On the other hand, we have seen clues that he's restricting the project. So if we have reason to be cynical about his motives, then we even have a way of being cynical about his generosity. Maybe he wants it to be a Persian project, not a Jewish project. And that's why he emphasizes, I want to make sure that our money is used for building it, not the Jewish money. And he's limiting the extent of the building project. As we saw, there has to be wood. It can't be too big. It has to only be used for sacrifice, etc. Yeah.
It's of interest in current context.
Yes.
We talked about last week about Iran nowadays.
Yes.
And the sort of the nationalist movement is being encouraged, and they're very proud of their ancient history. They particularly mentioned they're proud of Cyrus.
Yes, yes. There is it's beyond the scope of the ship, but there's a lot of Iranian pride in this, in the Persian heritage, 100% on Osiris, and there's a lot of discussion about sort of theologically how they align with Muslim culture and so on. But Iran is very conscious of its Persian 100%. Okay, let's move on. Posuk test, that's over the page. Again, if anyone's joined since, I'll just repost the link for those who want it. And again, it depends how you read the ongoing psukim. Posuk 9, he seems to be even more generous. He says, I'm now going to pay for the korbanos, and that which they need of young bulls and rams and lambs for the burnt offerings to the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the words of the priest, let them be given that day. I'm going to even pay for the korbanos. Pasuk 10, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savour unto the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and of his sons. So again, is this Daryovesh who has a more transactional relationship to the project, and perhaps also wants to ensure that the project is very clearly the Jews' Persian loyalty playing out. He wants to be sure when you build your Beis Hamikdash, make sure that when you're bringing the korbanos, you're very clear that these korbanos are being brought on behalf of my family and on behalf of Persian national or royal interest, or at least personal motives, a transactional relationship. We saw, by the way, that when the original partners wanted to join the Jews in the project, the native inhabitants, the Samaritans who were native in the land, one of the reasons were that were happy to accept God as the high king, the high God, over a whole pantheon of God. In the ancient world, people didn't see it as a contradiction to say, we've got our gods, you've got your gods. So it's no bad thing for me also to send sacrifices occasionally to your God. Maybe I don't want to send too many because I don't want to get my God jealous. But Daryovesh isn't necessarily a marmin in any particular way. He may simply be saying the Jews have their gods. It's not a bad thing for me to fund sacrifices for theirs so that they daven and pray for me also. And this was not a partnership that the Jews wanted. The whole trigger of the enmity of the native inhabitants who then lobbied against Koresh's decree and against the return to Zion was because they didn't want a partnership with someone who is a polytheist, but merely recognizes God as one of the gods, even as the high god. And certainly they wouldn't necessarily be delighted with a king's sponsorship of sacrifices if the king is a pagan and merely wants the god of their god to daven for them. So again, we can read these pasukim charitably or uncharitably. Maybe Darius is a great figure he's not just sponsoring the building of the Beis Hamikdash, he's even sponsoring the korbanos. Or there's something transactional in what he's doing, in which he's saying, as long as you daven for me. And again, the Gemara is going to pick up on this point over here and pick up and note it. Then he says, another decree for me, Pasuk 11, Uminian for me, sim ta'im, make a decree. Let's read in the English again, just to avoid Aramaic. This is Pasuk 11. Whoever shall alter this world, let a beam be pulled out from his house, and let he be lifted up and fastened there. And let his house be made a dunghill forever. Okay, what's he saying over here? What happens to the person who's altering this decree? What's his sticky end specifically? It sounds like hanging. Right, we know Persians hang people. How do we know that? How do we know Persians hang people? The whole Purim Sutta, right? Okay. So he's saying a beam should be pulled to the house should be destroyed. Now, again, is this saying that anyone who opposes the rebuilding project, I want you, Tatanai, to hang them? In which case, Daryovish is being a very great king, and he's saying, I don't want the same mess to happen last time, in which there were lobbyists against the Jewish project and interference by the Samaritans. Anyone who does that, smash them. And by the way, we don't find the same Samaritan interference at this. We'll come back to it later, but for now, we don't find Samaritan interference. Or does he mean anyone who alters this, let them be smashed? What sort of form of altering would it be?
Well,
disobeying my instructions. If they build a bigger Beis Hamikdash than I allowed, if they start making it fortress-like, if they don't accept my money and they want it to be a nationalist project, and so on and so forth. So again, all I'm trying to say is Daryovesh is an interesting character, not clear to know and understand exactly what his motives are and what game he is playing. Now, in Pasuk 12, he says, and may the God that has caused his name to dwell there overthrow all kings and peoples that shall put their hands to alter the same, to destroy this house of God, which is at Yerushalayim. I, Darius, have made a decree, and let it be done with all diligence. Okay, so here he says specifically, I want God to punish those who are opposing this project, and all those who alter this decree. Again, supporting the project, and yet also maybe opposing it, or maybe saying that let God punish them. That's not what I'm including in the decree. We don't know. Okay, let's carry on a few more psukim, and then we will try and analyze Daryovesh a bit more. So what happens? He says, I want this to be done with diligence. That means with speed, with haste. Let it happen. Pasuk 13, Tatanai the governor, and we met him before, we don't know much about him, Shasar Boznai, one of his companions. And because Darius the king had sent such a decree, they acted with diligence. So they say, get on with the project, Jews, right? Build, the king has decreed. And the elders of the Jew, Pasuk 14, the Jewish elders, they built and they were successful, they prospered, they were matzliach. The Aramaic word is they were matzliach, they succeeded. Through the prophecy of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah ben Iddo, we saw that before. And they built and finished according to the commandment of the God of Israel, according to the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, the king of Persia. So we're going to have to come back to this pasuk. And this house was finished on the third day of the month of Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Okay. So what we've said is Daryavesh writes a strong supportive letter for the Jews. There's no doubt about that. He may be somewhat limiting the project and not, behaving in the nicest manner possible, but he certainly has been supportive of the project. He says, get on with the job. I want it to succeed. He wants Jewish support. Maybe he's going through his own internal conflict and he's not interested in having troubles with the Jews. We discussed that last week. And and they indeed build, and they succeed, and the Beis Hamikdash is finished in the 6th year of Daryavesh on the 3rd of Adar, and this is obviously a very happy moment. This is the completion of the second Beis Hamikdash. Now, let's just pause for a few minutes and ask ourselves a few questions. First of all, what is Daryavesh's motives? Why is he so supportive? So it could be like Koresh, that he sees this as a divine mission. It could be like Koresh, that there's political reasons for this. This is a political policy. He's happy for people to have local autonomy. It could be he's the son of Esther and Achashverosh. We saw that in Chazal, and therefore he's a Phydo-Semitic. He's pro-Jews. It could be that he is struggling with his own legitimacy. He belongs to a cadet branch of the royal family, or a descendant of Achashverosh. He's somewhat of a usurper. It could be he's facing leadership challenges. We don't know. But what the Novi does tell us is that you have this dual action going on. This is through Daryavesh's initiative, but this is also based on a prophecy of Haggai and Zechariah. And that's what we looked at a few weeks back in the beginning of Perek Vav, when this project is initiated by Haggai and Zechariah. And you have here again one of the themes of Sefer Ezra, which is there's a parallel between the Ratzon Hashem and the sort of political machinations going on. So on the one hand, there's politics here and mercenary calculations by kings and their own political agenda. And on the other hand, this is Hashem at work. And this is one of the themes that it seems we need to ask ourselves a question. Why is Sefer Ezra Nechemia in Tanakh? I mean, it's very interesting what we're learning. It's very interesting history. Someone described it to me last week after the shir as it's like detective work. We're trying to piece together what's going on, understanding it, what's Darius's motivations, why couldn't they find the decree. It's really interesting story. But what's the nach in it? What's the ksuvim in it? Why is this important for us to know? It's the second Beis Hamikdash. Okay, nice piece of history. What's the timeless lessons in this? It's history. Okay, so the second Beis Hamikdash got built. Who cares about this? So there's a number of themes that we've been looking at. But what we need to understand is that here is the establishment of a new Jewish kingdom, very different to the kingdom in the time of David and Shlomo. There aren't Nevi'im anymore around. So they're the last of the Nevi'im, the Chari ending, and then they're going to be an extended period of silence from Hashem, right? Again, Hanukkah's approaching, and Hanukkah's it's Jews having to make decisions under rabbinic leadership, but there's no words of Hashem directly. These are the dying days of Nevuah, and it's a restoration of a kingdom, a Jewish state that's not going to have kings for a short time. Maybe the Hashmonaim have kings. Much of the time, it's not going to be independent. It's going to be a vassal state of big empires. Most of the Second Temple era, vassal state of Persia, then vassal state of Greece. It's a small period of independence under Hashmonaim. Doesn't actually go so well, and then a horrible period of vassal state of Rome till the Great Rebellion, and then the Beis Hamikdash gets destroyed. It's a whole different type of Jewish state, and it's dealing with issues that need to be dealt with that have an eternity to them. Haraya, the proof is because we're dealing with the same issues now when we're trying to. Again, I'm not making messianic comparisons or anything like that, but when you're trying to build a state that has to grapple with great powers, that unlike David and Shlomo can't just ignore the political realities around it, and that don't have Nevi'im to turn to, when you've got a small population of Jews returning and it's not the whole Jewish population, and when they're trying to settle the land and they're trying to deal with hostile locals who don't like that they've come back and saying you're colonial oppressors, which is what we're reading about. These are the stories that parallel this and match this. And one of the themes that the Novi wants us to notice is there is a parallel between the Ratzon Hashem and the politics. Hashem is now operating in a very different way. We no longer have the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right? We no longer have the grand Kriyas Yamsuf and Makkas and so on. We don't have that level. We don't even have the lower level of miracles of the Kivush Oretz. We don't have the miracles of Yeshua ben Nun. Yeshua ben Nun is not Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not pure miraculous where they're living in the desert in this completely miraculous existence with Mon and with things. They're fighting, but they have the walls of Yericho coming down. They have the sun stopping in the sky. They have the Novi telling them the siege will be lifted, and they come out and everyone has run away or everyone is dead. The first base of Mikdash, the sort of overt presence of Hashem is very clear in action, and it's very clear in communication. There's Nevi'im around. Second base of Mikdash, you have to read Hashem in the politics. You have to understand what's going on. And again, this is very topical for our times. And obviously, different communities within the Jewish world are reading what's going on in subtly different ways. But one thing don't do. Don't misunderstand and don't think that Hashem is behind the scene over here. This is certainly part of the themes. And this is brought out in this pasuk and elsewhere in pasuk 14, in which they succeed, they build, they prosper through the prophecy of the Nevi'im, and according to the command of God, and according to the decree of the Persian king Cyrus, Darius, and Achashashta. So very interesting. What do you mean? You're comparing Hashem to Cyrus and to Koresh and to Darius? But that's what it says. They succeeded in the words of the prophets, the words, commands of Hashem, and the decree of the Persian kings. And that's the juggling act that we have to have in their life. That's what they have to succeed in Ezra, and that's what they have to have in their continued life. Sorry.
Works through these human characters, as it were.
Yeah, yeah.
Some people think Trump is an agent of change.
Yes, yeah. The same thing. Hashem is working through secular leaders and presidents of America and the like. Yeah, and the Malbim has a very beautiful language that he uses. This is on page 3. And for some reason in the print version I gave out, the page numbers didn't print, but the third page. In Pasuk Yodala, don't worry if you can't find it because it's very dense text. I found the Malbim like so indescribably beautiful. By the way, everything I'm saying here is from the Malbim. Just to make that absolutely clear. I mentioned that last week and we looked at some of it inside. In the interest of time, we're not looking inside, but I wanted people to have this text. It's just so beautiful. I couldn't bring myself to cut out a single word of what he wrote. But in Pasuk Yodalad, he says, so this is Aramaic. They built the project based on the decree of God and the decree of Cyrus, etc. So he says, what's going on is divine intervention. Atifa is wrapped in nature. From God's point of view, it's direct godly supervision, but not revealed, but through the kings, the politicians, that God put this in his heart. And then he brings a quote from Chazal. It should have been that the second return was a restoration of the Jewish kingdom with miracles done, like the miracles of the days of Yeshua ben Nun, but sin meant that wasn't the case. They were not on a spiritual level to have that level of divine intervention, and therefore all they had was miracles wrapped in nature. Hashgacha mu'tefet b'teva, miracles wrapped in nature. So this is a very important idea. Why does he say Nissim like the times of Yeshua ben Nun? They're not going to be Moshe Rabbeinu. There is no second Moshe Rabbeinu. The life in the desert, which is completely artificial and miraculous, isn't meant to be the case. We're entering Eretz Yisrael again. But who led the first time entry into Eretz Yisrael? Yeshua ben Nun. This is a second entry into Eretz Yisrael, led this time by, well, at this stage, Zerubbabel and the like, but eventually by Ezra. And this time, they are not privileged to have an entry with like Yeshua ben Nun, and therefore it's a sort of very different type of experience. So that's I think a very important theme that emerges from the Nevi'im, the difference between and perhaps giving us an indication of the timelessness of the story, this sort of parallel, and it's one of the themes throughout Nach, the parallel between politics and Ratzon Hashem and how the two sort of work together. Now, I want to here at this point have a look at the final page. And again, I apologize that the numbering didn't come out. I should have put numbering in the sources. But literally halfway down the final page in the source sheet, we have a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Now, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah is fascinating. I did not print the whole Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. It's a very, very technical Gemara dealing with the issues of Rosh Hashanah, calendar issues, believe it or not. So the Gemara is dealing with how calendar works, and subtleties in how Pesukim label dates. Now, I'm not going to go into the subtleties, other than to say that the Gemara puts forward a suggestion that there are differences in how dates are labeled, whether you're talking about Malchei Yisrael or Malchei Akum. You're talking about Jewish kings or pagan kings, non-Jewish kings. If we are dating things, linking it to the reign of a Jewish king, the language will work in method A. If we are dating it using the language of non-Jewish kings, language will use method B. Asks the Gemara, your theory doesn't work because when it describes the dating of Koresh's reign, it uses Jewish language. It sounds almost as if it's calling Koresh a Jewish king. Answers the Gemara again halfway through page 4. Talmud Maseches Rosh Hashanah Gimel and Beis Yudalad Amud Amar Rabavo Koresh Melech Kosher Hoya. Koresh was a kosher king. He was a great king, a kosher king. Therefore, it lists the dates as using the terminology used for Jewish kings. An amazing Gemara that he's dated almost as if he's a Jewish ruler. The degree of affection for Koresh and respect, the degree to which somehow through his kingship shines the Malchus of Hashem, is such that we'll use Jewish language about his reign and about how the dates work. An amazing Gemara. Then the Gemara asks that with Dayovesh, we find contradiction in dates, and we don't find the dating giving him Jewish terminology. Now, surely Dayovesh is also a great king. And if he's not, make up your minds, and the Gemara points out that the language is unclear in how it describes the terminology of Dayovesh. But before that, it brings a brisa, Tana. We've learned in a brisa, who Koresh, who Dayovesh, who Atachashta. Koresh, Dayovesh, and Achatashta are one person. They're different names for one person. Why do they have three different names? Koresh Shemelach Kosher Haya. Koresh because he was a kosher king. So Koresh sounds like kosher. Atachashta al Shem al Chusay. Achatashta was the royal title given to kings. It was his kingship name. Either the kings were given special kingship names, or they had a generic name like Pharaoh. Or Mas Shemai, what was his real private name? Dayovesh Shemai, his private name was Darius. Very interesting. Now, I call your attention, if we can just turn back to page 2, Pasuk Yudalid, thank you, Simon, Pasuk 14. And the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai and Zechariah, and they built and finished according to the commandments of God, according to the decree of Cyrus and Dayovesh, and Atachashta, king of Persia. So in Pshutei Shel Mikra, in the simplest reading of the Pasuk, it doesn't sound like they're one person. On the other hand, it says, Melech Poros, the king of Poros. Is that one title? Should it not say kings of Persia? So it is a little unclear what's going on over here. And this really leads us to a number of other points, which again, we're not going to go through. This is really the source of the whole dating and chronological, part of the dating and chronological confusion, which is, did Chazal have a tradition that these figures who seem to be three figures are really one, in which case we compress the chronology, or did Chazal mean this in a midrashic sense, that they behave in a similar way, that Koresh and Dayovesh are similar, have similar qualities? Or Rashi and Tosfos bring the suggestion: is this a different Koresh? Is this Koresh the second? And is Chazal saying Koresh the second and Darius are the same person? So there's a lot of confusion around what these dates mean. And do we even have to accept Chazal's tradition in this? We accept halacha, but if this is medrash, maybe we're entitled to learn Pshutei Shel Mikra. This is something I've discussed on the Sunday morning shurim, available recordings uploaded, about the relationship between Pshat and medrash. But one of the themes that emerges already in Rashi and certainly in the Ramban and Ibn Ezra is an idea that this is how Chazal said it midrashically, but our job is to learn Pshutei Shel Mikra. So are Chazal making a point in Pshutei Shel Mikra, in the simplest reading of the Psukim, or is it a midrashic comment? Are we entitled to argue? So the Malbim, very, very briefly, in the continuation of this Malbim that we began reading, summarizes all of these points. And again, I simply want to remind you right at the beginning, when I brought the Jewish dating, Chazal's dating, and then I brought the secular dating, and I said, how can I bring secular dating when Chazal had a tradition and it argues? And the answer is, we'll see in a moment, that the Malbim was aware of this. The Malbim quotes a Rishon who already points out that Chazal's dating doesn't seem in line with Pshutei Shel Mikra. So at this point we surrender. In other words, it's very unclear. It doesn't at this stage seem resolvable to know how to align Chazal's dating and the Pshuto Shemikra of the Tanakh and the secular understanding of the dating. And there comes a point when we need to surrender and simply just acknowledge the confusion around the timeline. From a halachic point of view, we use various calculations that depend on dating. We write gittin that have to be dated accurately. That doesn't matter. Maybe we can use the consensus dating. Our calendar is built on calculations about how many years we are from the creation of the world. So again, there's so much more to be said around this. But let's just have a brief look at, again, in the Malbim. This is the middle of page 3 in the source sheets. Don't worry if you can't, because it's a long text in the Malbim. The Malbim simply says, on Pasuk 14, so that's about a third of the way from the bottom on page 3. According to the sages in Rosh Hashanah, which we just saw, this is one name. V'chein perish Rashi, and Rashi on the pasuk says, Achatashto hu Dayavesh, v'nikra Shem Alkein Malchus, etc. And there's a Rashi elsewhere who explains the same idea. Ulam, in continuing in the bold, Harazah. Harazah is Rab Zachariah Halevi, a provincial Rishon, the author of the Baal HaMaor, so very, doesn't need my agreement, very, very important authority. In the first Perek of Rosh Hashanah, in his commentary in the Gemara, he says, this is the midrashic understanding. But the correct understanding, according to the Pasuk, is that these are all 3 separate kings, etc., etc., etc. And the Pshat in Pasuk Yodalad is that it was a combination of 3 kings who led to the building and rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. If we ask ourselves historically, how come there was a Beis HaMikdash? The Pasuk is now summarizing, it's through the original decree of Koresh, it's through the ongoing decree of Daryavesh, and it's through Atatachshta, who we'll get to later, and we mentioned earlier, who allowed the building of the walls, which allowed them to defend themselves against the foreign attacks, etc. So it's a combined project of 3 different kings of Persia. Okay, so we turn back to page 4 in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, and to summarize what we have said so far, the Gemara says, number 1, Koresh is a good king. He's such a good king that we use Jewish dating terminology, language normally reserved for Jewish kings, to describe the chronology of his reign. Then we have a medrash that says that Daryavesh and Koresh and Artachashta are one, and we don't know if it's meant literally or midrashically. And finally, a Gemara that asks, which I didn't print, that there is a contradiction between the dating in Daryavesh, whether he was a good or a bad king. And the Gemara wants to resolve it. Rabbi Yitzchak, says Rabbi Yitzchak, Lo kasha, kan kodem shehichmitz. The original language, positive language about Daryavesh is before he fermented chometz, before he went off the derech, before he became corrupted. Kan la'achar shehichmitz. And the second language is after he fermented, after he became corrupted. So Chazal say he's not such a great king. He at one stage was following Koresh's path, and at the end of the day, we're grateful for him that he let us return and build the Beis HaMikdash, but he became corrupt over time. Who is he who became corrupt? So I added in brackets, this is not the language of the Gemara, either Koresh II or Daryavesh, it depends on the language that we're talking about. But either way, Daryavesh becomes corrupted. Now, again, does this align with the view that Daryavesh is the son of Esther? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe the son of Esther sadly became corrupted. How do we see that Daryavesh became corrupted? I'm not going to read, in the interest of time, the continuation of the Gemara, but it basically makes all the points we made. It said we see that he insisted that there should be wood in the building, so he doesn't want the wood to become, he doesn't want the building to be a fortress. He wants it to be vulnerable, that there's a way of destroying it if he needs to. And we see that he has this very transactional relationship to his charitable donations with bringing korbanos, because he says, bring if you pray for me. And that shows he's not such a big tzaddik. That's the continuation of the Gemara. Very, very interesting. So it's holding him to quite high standards. Very, very interesting. But so does hichmitz mean he becomes a rotter? It doesn't mean that. But it doesn't mean he doesn't deserve this unique honor of the chronology of his reign being described in Jewish terms. Okay, so to summarize, Koresh is this remarkable figure. He's a secular, a non-Jewish ruler of Persia, and yet the Tanakh chooses to use terminology about him that's reminiscent of being a Jewish king. Daryavesh he's an okay person. He's a good person. He lets the Jews come back, but he doesn't. Certainly, by the later periods of his reign, he doesn't deserve the title of to be used this incredible language as if he's a Jewish king, because his own ego and self-interest begins getting in the way. He restricts the project and doesn't offer things up with such lishma motives. As an aside, the Gemara mentions 2 points, and I'll just mention them briefly. We're not going to have time to learn the Gemara inside. The Gemara says that we find the description of Shlomo's building also including wood. Uh, the Gemara says, yeah, but it wasn't wood placed on every three layers, so it could be burnt down. If you read the Pesukim, the wall was capped with wood. It was at the top. That's not a vulnerability in the building. More than that, we find that it was limed over, it was cemented over, so it couldn't burn. Whereas here, it's in the middle of the building and wasn't cemented over, and therefore could burn. Just mentioning that for those who, if one day you learn Malachim and you say, well, a minute, Zobin told me that, Koresh is being Daryavish is being horrible for insisting there's wood in the building, but Shlomo also used wood in the building. The Gemara picks up on this. The second point the Gemara makes, which is just an interesting theological aside, the Gemara says there's nothing wrong with giving tzedakah conditionally. Most mitzvahs shouldn't be conditional, but tzedakah, if that's what motivates you, because tzedakah, Gemara speaks, it's also speak quite favorably about donations being given where the whole of donations are built through plaques being put up in people's names and so on. And as when it comes to tzedakah, don't be such a tzaddik. We want people to give and be motivated to give, even if they use it as we all give tzedakah, Eloi Nishmas, or as a refuah shalema, or with a plaque up. We accept the lo lishma in tzedakah. The Gemara answers, if a Jewish person who is a ma'amin does that, that's okay, because they're a believer, and therefore, even if the end the person doesn't get a refuah shalema, they accept that. They didn't mean it in a transactional way with God. They said, please Hashem, it's a prayer. Please Hashem, can you take the zuchus of the tzedakah and bring a refuah shalema? However, if a pagan does it, who is Dayavesh, he's not accepting God as the exclusive God. He's saying God is a God amongst many. So what happens if God doesn't keep his word and doesn't make him and his sons prosper, which is his deal? He'll turn to God and say, hey, you're no good, or the other gods are more powerful than you didn't win that argument, or you broke our deal. He'll turn against God. So that sort of transactional relationship is inappropriate. You can give tzedakah for refuah shlema. You're entitled to say, I want my mitzvah to bring merit because there's people I desperately love that I want them to be healed. But to make a transactional, conditional deal, that's not appropriate. That's a sort of theological side point in the Gemara. Yeah.
Problem then, building the second Beis Hamikdash on this basis, where there is this transactional conditionality that is the approach that Dayavesh is taking, where he says, well, I'll pay for it
Yes.
because I want this.
Yes.
And then I'll cover the cost of the cup on us because, it's like a bracha here.
Yes.
So the intrinsic kedusha is diminished.
Yes. So Dan is asking, it seems then that from the very building of the Beis Hamikdash, there's sadly an impurity that's crept into it. It's Persian money, and it's not with the purest of motives, and there's conditionalities built in. And Dan says, yes, this is part of that which is inferior in the building of the second Beis Hamikdash. It's not built by a David and a Shlomo. It's a different narrative, and that's going to be a sad part of the history of the second Beis Hamikdash, that it doesn't roll on and continue in the most positive way.
So why didn't he step in?
Why didn't they step in? It seems they were unable to. Don't forget that Dayavesh said, anyone who alters any of this, their house is destroyed and they're going to be hung from the beams of their house. Now, again, we don't know what he means by all of this, but this definitely appears to be the case. And there are many questions that are unanswered about history, but thus appears to be the structure of things. Let's try and move on a little bit. So we've now dealt with the fascinating and somewhat nuanced personality of Dayavesh, but either way, the house of Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash, is complete. We now read the last three psukim in Aramaic before we switch back to Hebrew. Let's read the last psukim. And the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites, and the rest of the children of captivity kept the dedication of this house of God with joy. So they celebrated the dedication, Pasuk 16. And they offered at the dedication of the house of Hashem a vast array of offerings, 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs, a sin offering for all of Israel, 12 he-goats according to the number of the tribes of Israel. And Pasuk 18, they set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their courses for the service of Hashem, which is in Jerusalem, as is written in the book of Moses, in Torah Moshe, in the Sefer of Moshe. So here finishes the Aramaic. Basically, they dedicate the Beis Hamikdash in line with the wishes of... they dedicate the Beis Hamikdash, and then Pasuk 19 and on switches back to Hebrew, and it describes the keeping of the first Pesach on the 14th day of the first month, in other words, on the 14th of Nisan, and with that concludes the chapter.
So is it they switched to Hebrew then because that they were back in normal?
Oh, wonderful. So Pasuk 19 and on reverts back to an internal Jewish story. They're offering the Korban Pesach. The king of Persia has no interest in that. Psukim 15 to 18, even though it's no longer 16 to 18, I'm sorry, even though it's no longer the diplomatic communication of the king to the Jews, that the letter finishes in 12. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 is back to narrative. It's no longer communication between the king and his Tatanai. Nonetheless, it's part of international politics, because what does 13, 14, 15 say? It says they did what the king said and they built the Beis HaMikdash. What does 16, 17, 18 say? They started the running of the Beis HaMikdash and they inaugurated it with Korbanos. Is the king interested in the inauguration with Korbanos? Absolutely, he said so. What did he say? Go back to Pasuk 9. He said, and what Korbanos you need, I want you to bring there in order that I should prosper. So they can't not bring Korbanos. Don't forget, by the way, the story of the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, when Rome sends a carbon to Beis HaMikdash, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and the malicious Bar Kamsa gives it a mum so that they're unable to offer it, and they refuse to offer it, and Rome goes crazy and says, you're refusing to offer our korbanos in your temple. That's a rebellion, evidence of rebellion, and according to Chazal, that's one of the triggers of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So we get back again down to your question. Do they have any choice over here? They're playing with fire. They have no choice. So much so that the description of the inauguration of the temple is written in Aramaic, and the story only switches back to Hebrew. That's why I left a gap between Pasuk 18 and Pasuk 19, because I wanted to everyone to notice this. The story switches back in Pasuk 19 to Hebrew. Korban Pesach, that's internal Jewish stuff going on. But till this point, I think that the author is sort of hinting to us what politics and what isn't politics. This is all still part of the diplomatic event. If they don't celebrate the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash in line with how the king wanted it to occur, he's not going to be happy. They have to bring it in his way with his sponsored korbanos as part of the dedication offering. That seems to be the reading of the psukim. Now, let's just for a few moments think about the dedication process. So Pasuk 17 tells us they offer a vast array of korbanos. Are we used to the idea that we offer korbanos at the time of dedication?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. Where do we know that from?
Well,
At the first time when the Beis HaMikdash is newly inaugurated, do we know this idea of bringing lots and lots of korbanos? Where do we know that from? You're a Balkura.
well,
Before that, the Mishkan is the first Beis HaMikdash. Right? Think of the Nesiim, exactly, Pashas Nossim, Bar Mitzvah, etc. Right? All the Nesiim and everything else. B'Yom Shmini, whole descriptions of Chanukah Sabai, so 100%. So that's very traditional. And then we see it repeated again. Now you're correct. I get to your point. In Nach, we see that when Shlomo dedicated the Beis HaMikdash, also he brought a vast array of kommanos. So that's how Bati Mikdash are evidently inaugurated. More interestingly than they offer with at the time of the Mishkan, there's a medrash on the Pesukim in the Mishkan that when they're inaugurating the Mishkan, they're still in the Midbar, they don't have so many animals, but when they inaugurate the Beis HaMikdash of Shlomo and inaugurate the second Beis HaMikdash, the medrash picks up on that, they're able to offer more korbanos because they're now in their homeland as opposed to the Mishkan, which is a portable transfer. Now, they also offer, and here I do want to spend a few minutes talking about this. They also offer 12 goats according to the numbers of the tribes of Israel. They're 12 Shvatim, so 12 goats. What is this? It's a sin offering. Let's read the English. They offered at the dedication of the house of God 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs, comma, and for a sinner offering for all of Israel, 12 goats according to the number of the tribes of Israel. Now, how many Shvatim are there in existence at this point?
2 or 3.
2 or 3. Levi and Yehuda and Binyamin, right? The 10 tribes have gone into exile. Number 1. Number 2, why are they offering a sin offering over here? Who's sinned? What are areas going on? So I call on you, please, to turn to page 4 again, and we will just look at an array of explanations over here. So we'll start with a comment actually at the bottom of page 3, the Malbim. The Malbim says that how can you bring sin offerings? Can you choose to bring a sin offering on behalf of Israel? Is there such an idea? Individuals who know their sins bring sin offerings. How can you bring sin offerings? So the Malbim in Pasuk Yud Zayin near the bottom of the page says, Hikrivu korbanos eila. It was se'ir chatos b'tzibor. Eino al pi al din. It's not halachically correct. A normal din. Rak hara shah al pi anavim. It was a temporary law based upon the rules of the prophet. So the Malbim seems to understand that I guess there's been a 70-year absence without a Beis Hamikdash. No one has been able to bring korbanos, and therefore the Nevi'im instruct them as a one-off to do a non-regular halachic thing. It's called Hora'as Shah in halacha, a temporary decree, to bring korbanos as a national atonement project. And we can understand that there's a need for national atonement. Don't forget, they're returning from exile. So it makes sense to bring national atonement. Let's turn to page 4, and we'll just conclude with this. We're going to look at the comments of the Metzudas David. So this is the sort of fourth paragraph down, about a third of the way down on the fourth page. V'tzipiri se'iri Ezra Nechatos b'avur kol Yisrael, on behalf of all of the Jews, even though only Yehuda and Binyamin came back, nonetheless, they brought korbanos for all the 12 tribes who didn't come back. Now, does he mean by that just they're bringing for the whole of the Jewish people because are they still in contact with the rest of the 10 tribes? Do they still feel a national responsibility towards them? Or do they need the chatos to atone for them not returning? Don't forget, why did the 10 tribes not come back? Because they were exiled by Sancherev and they were too guilty. How many of Yehuda and Binyamin have come back? 40,000. The most Jews have remained in Bavel. So is this an atonement or a hope for the future that they would come back? Etc. Again, all interesting questions. I will conclude with one tantalizing thought. Maybe some of the 10 tribes did take advantage of the re-establishment of a Jewish state to come back. And next week, we will see a tantalizing clue that maybe some of the 10 tribes did come back. So for now, we're finishing with a historic riddle. What happened to the 10 tribes? We don't know the answer to this day. Was there some level of communication still ongoing in the early second Beis Hamikdash period? We don't know. Is there a possibility that some of the 10 tribes returned? Hints to it. Both here in the fact they're bringing korbanos for all 12 tribes, they still think of themselves as a 12 tribes people, and hints to that phenomena that we will see next week. So just to summarize where we are concluding the story, they have inaugurated the Beis Hamikdash. They have offered korbanos, including the korban chatos as perhaps a national atonement, and they have perhaps for the 12 tribes. And let me just finish, even though I'm going over time, because I just want to finish Pasuk 18. And they set the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their courses for the service of God. This is something the Mishnah speaks about at length, that at any one time you didn't have all of the Kohanim and Leviim serving, but they had a rota that was later established as families, 24 Mishmaros, and they took turns, and they only really assembled at the busy times of the year, like Pesach and the Shalosh Regalim. There's basically, if you take the Yomim Tovim out, there are 48 weeks of the year, and they were split into 24 Toranut groups, Mishmarot, and each group would serve for 2 weeks. So Kohanim and Nevi'im only served for 2 weeks a year. That's for 48 weeks, 24 times 2. And then for the remaining 4 weeks of the year, that was the Yom Tov season, they would all come back to serve. And they set up this division. Interestingly, it says, as is written in the book of Moshe. Nowhere in the book of Moshe does it talk about the Mishmar set up. So probably what it means is they set up the Mishmaros and then they acted in line with the laws of bringing korbanos, as is written in the book of Moshe. With that, we conclude the Aramaic session. And please God, next week we will go back to internal Jewish affairs and we will start the Hebrew section of what do they now do now that they've established their little quasi-independent vassal state Jewish country again. But that's how we conclude this week's shir. I wish everyone a good evening and apologies for going slightly over time, but we had to get to this point. Sure. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry?
Thank you, Dayan Zobin.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yes, there is an idea that in Menachem some of the 10 tribes came back. So it may be that there were even Jews that were coming back already then in Menachem. There's a Tosfos that speaks about this and other such sources. Yeah. Okay. And we'll stop here for now.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Many
Thank you.
thanks.
A great pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.